I was given a very flexible operating policy for Project Grudge because no one knew the best way to track down UFOs. I had only one restriction, and that was that I wouldn't have my people spending time doing a lot of wild speculating. Our job would be to analyze each and every UFO report and try to find what we believe to be an honest, unbiased answer. If we could not identify the reported object as being a balloon, meteor, planet, or one of 100 other common things that are sometimes called UFOs, we would mark the folder Unknown and file it in a special file. At some later date, when we built up enough of these unknown reports, we'd study them. As long as I was chief of the UFO project, this was our basic rule. If anyone became anti-flying saucer and was no longer capable of making an unbiased evaluation of a report, out he went. Conversely, anyone who became a believer was through. We were too busy during the initial phases of the project to speculate as to whether the unknowns were spaceships, space monsters, Soviet weapons, or ethereal visions. I had to let 3 people go for being too pro or too con. By the latter part of November 1951, I knew most of what had taken place in prior UFO projects and what I expected to do. The people in Project Sign and the old Project Grudge had made many mistakes. I studied these mistakes and profited by them. I could see that my predecessors had had a rough job. Mine would be a little bit easier because of the pioneering they had done. Lieutenant Metcher and I had sorted out all of the pre-1951 files, refiled them, studied them, and outlined the future course of the new Project Grudge. When Lieutenant Colonel Rosengarten and Lieutenant Cummings had been at the Pentagon briefing Major General Cabell on the Fort Monmouth incidents, the general had told them to report back when the new project was formed and ready to go. We were ready to go, but before taking my ideas to the Pentagon, I thought it might be wise to try them out on a few other people to get their reaction. Colonel Frank Dunn, then chief of ATIC, liked this idea. We had many well-known scientists and engineers who periodically visited ATIC as consultants, and Colonel Dunn suggested that these people's opinions and comments would be valuable. For the next 2 weeks, every visitor to ATIC who had a reputation as a scientist, engineer, or scholar got a UFO briefing. Unfortunately, the names of these people cannot be revealed because I promised them complete anonymity. But the list reads like a page from great men of science. Altogether, 9 people visited the project during this trial period. Of the 9, 2 thought the Air Force was wasting its time, 1 could be called indifferent, and 6 were very enthusiastic over the project. This was a shock to me. I had expected reactions that ranged from an extremely cold absolute 0 to a mild 20 below. Instead, I found out that UFOs were being freely and seriously discussed in scientific circles. The majority of the visitors thought that the Air Force had goofed on previous projects and were very happy to find out that the project was being reestablished. All of the visitors, even the 2 who thought we were wasting our time, had good suggestions on what to do. All of them offered their services at any future time when they might be needed. Several of these people became very good friends and valuable consultants later on. About 2 weeks before Christmas in 1951, Colonel Dunn and I went to the Pentagon to give my report. Major General John A. Samford had replaced Major General Cabell as Director of Intelligence, but General Samford must have been told about the UFO situation because he was familiar with the general aspects of the problem. He had appointed his assistant for production, Brigadier General W. M. Garland, to ride herd on the project for him. Colonel Dunn briefly outlined to General Samford what we planned to do. He explained our basic policy, that of setting aside the unknowns and not speculating on them, and he told how the scientists visiting ATIC had liked the plans for the new Project Grudge. There was some discussion about the Air Force's and ATIC's responsibility for the UFO reports. General Garland stated, and it was later confirmed in writing, that the Air Force was solely responsible for investigating and evaluating all UFO reports. Within the Air Force, ATIC was the responsible agency. This in turn meant that Project Grudge was responsible for all UFO reports made by any branch of the military service. I started my briefing by telling General Samford and his staff about the present UFO situation. The UFO reports had never stopped coming in since they had first started in June 1947. There was some correlation between publicity and the number of sightings. Reports came in only when the press was playing up UFOs. Just within the past few months, the number of good reports had increased sharply, and there had been no publicity. UFOs were seen more frequently around areas vital to the defense of the United States. The Los Alamos Albuquerque area, Oak Ridge, and White Sands Proving Grounds rated high. Port areas, strategic air command bases, and industrial areas ranked next. UFOs had been reported from every state in the Union and from every foreign country. The U.S. did not have a monopoly. The frequency of the UFO reports was interesting. Every July, there was a sudden increase in the number of reports, and July was always the peak month of the year. Just before Christmas, there was usually a minor peak. The Grudge Report had not been the solution of the UFO problem. It was true that a large percentage of the reports were due to the misidentification of known objects. People were seeing balloons, airplanes, planets, but this was not the final answer. There were a few hoaxes, hallucinations, publicity seekers, and fatigued pilots, but reports from these people constituted less than 1% of the total. Left over was a residue of very good and very unexplainable UFO sightings that were classified as unknown. The quality of the reports was getting better, I told the officers. They contained more details that could be used for analysis, and the details were more precise and accurate, but still they left much to be desired. Every one of the 9 scientists and engineers who had reviewed the UFO material at ATIC had made one strong point. We should give top priority to getting reasonably accurate measurements of the speed, altitude, and size of reported UFOs. This would serve 2 purposes. First, it would make it easy to sort out reports of common things, such as balloons, airplanes, etc. Second, and more important, if we could get even one fairly accurate measurement that showed that some object was traveling through the atmosphere at high speed and that it wasn't a meteor, the UFO riddle would be much easier to solve. I had worked out a plan to get some measured data, and I presented it to the group for their comments. I felt sure that before long the press would get wind of the Air Force's renewed effort to identify UFOs. When this happened, instead of being mysterious about the whole thing, we would freely admit the existence of the new project, explain the situation thoroughly and exactly as it was, and say that all UFO reports made to the Air Force would be given careful consideration. In this way, we would encourage more people to report what they were seeing, and we might get some good data. To further explain my point, I drew a sketch on a blackboard. Suppose that a UFO is reported over a fair-sized city. Now, we may get 1 or 2 reports, and these reports may be rather sketchy. This does us no good. All we can conclude is that somebody saw something that he couldn't identify. But suppose 50 people from all over the city reported the UFO. Then it would be profitable for us to go out and talk to these people, find out the time they saw the UFO and where they saw it, the direction and height above the horizon. Then we might be able to use these data, work out a triangulation problem, and get a fairly accurate measurement of speed, altitude, and size. Radar, of course, will give an accurate measurement of speed and altitude, I pointed out, but radar is not infallible. There is always the problem of weather. To get accurate radar data on a UFO, it is always necessary to prove that it wasn't weather that was causing the target. Radar is valuable, and we wanted radar reports, I said, but they should be considered only as a parallel effort and shouldn't take the place of visual sightings. In winding up my briefing, I again stressed the point that, as of the end of 1951, the date of this briefing, there was no positive proof that any craft foreign to our knowledge existed. All recommendations for the reorganization of Project Grudge were based solely upon the fact that there were many incredible reports of UFOs from many very reliable people. But they were still just flying saucer reports and couldn't be considered scientific proof. Everyone present at the meeting agreed. Each had read or had been briefed on these incredible reports. In fact, 2 of the people present had seen UFOs. Before the meeting adjourned, Colonel Dunn had one last question. He knew the answer, but he wanted it confirmed. Does the United States have a secret weapon that's being reported as a UFO? The answer was a flat no. In a few days, I was notified that my plan had been given the green light. I already had the plan written up in the form of a staff study, so I sent it through channels for formal approval. It had been obvious right from the start of the reorganization of Project Grudge that there would be questions that no one on my staff was technically competent to answer. To have a fully staffed project, I'd need an astronomer, a physicist, a chemist, a mathematician, a psychologist, and probably a dozen other specialists. It was, of course, impossible to have all of these people on my staff, so I decided to do the next best thing. I would set up a contract with some research organization who already had such people on their staff. Then I would call on them whenever their services were needed. I soon found a place that was interested in such a contract, and the Kirkland of Colonel Dunn's staff and I left Dayton for a 2-day conference with these people to outline what we wanted. Their organization cannot be identified by name because they are doing other highly secret work for the government. I'll call them Project Bear. Project Bear is a large, well-known research organization in the Midwest. The several hundred engineers and scientists who make up their staff run from experts in soils to nuclear physicists. They would make these people available to me to assist Project Grudge on any problem that might arise from a UFO report. They did not have a staff astronomer or psychologist, but they agreed to get them for us on a subcontract basis. Besides providing experts in every field of science, they would make 2 studies for us. A study of how much a person can be exposed